Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to At the Heart of the Matter with the Colorado Health Foundation. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, spending an hour and a half together with us. Have a bunch of different welcoming remarks to share with everyone, and we do have lots of folks registered this afternoon, so we'll continue to give everyone another moment or two to log on. And for those of you who are with us and who are settled and ready, we would love for you to share your name and your location, and maybe a word or two that comes to mind when you think about the concept of power. And before, I see a note there that I can barely hear you, so I'm going to speak up. So before anyone starts really actively using the chat, just a note about that. There's a little trick to the functionality in our event setting today. When you're using the chat for comments and questions and sharing your name this afternoon, please make sure that you're selecting the audience option that's labeled everyone before you hit send. Otherwise, your chat will not be visible to everyone. And thank you. I see folks popping their names in. Please share your name and location if you've just joined, and a couple of words that come to mind for you when you think about the concept of power. And I want to give a shout out to a few of you partners out there who we know are hosting lunch and learns as you listen into this event this afternoon. I think that's a fun and creative way to be engaging. A little birdie told me that Community Resources and Housing Development Corporation are out there doing this. So if others are doing the same and hosting a lunch and learn with your staff, let us know and we'll give you a little shout out too. Oh, yep, I see a whole team of CRDHC. All right, keep those coming. We do have a number of different accessibility features that we're offering in the event today, including simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish, which will be explained to all of you by our partners at Community Language Cooperative. So I would love to introduce Alejandra Arrieta from the Community Language Cooperative team. Alejandra is going to talk through both our commitment to language justice as well as explain that interpretation feature in Zoom for all of you. So Alejandro, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for having us. Thank you for your commitment to language justice. In the spirit of, I'm going to go ahead and actually go through this all in Spanish, and then I'll come back and go through all of it and repeat it in English, just so I'm not going back and forth within every sentence. So thank you for your patience in the meantime if your language is English. Hola a todos, muchas gracias por tenernos aquí con ustedes. Mi nombre es Alejandro Arrieta. Hoy estoy con mi colega Alonso. Estaremos interpretando al español hoy. Como siempre, pues queremos practicar la justicia del lenguaje lo más posible. Con eso le quiero dar las gracias a el Colorado Health Foundation por priorizar la justicia del lenguaje. Es una manera en la que cada persona puede participar en el idioma de su corazón completamente. Entonces, no lo van a ver ahora, pero justo después de estas instrucciones va a aparecer un icono terráqueo o un icono de mundo que va a aparecer en la parte inferior a mano derecha en su pantalla. Cuando vean ese globito, es como un círculo con rayitas en medio, van a seleccionarlo, escogen el español y ponen el audio original en mudo justo después para que solamente escuchen en el idioma de su preferencia. De ahí, si tienen algún problemita o están batallando, por favor avísenos en los mensajes de chat para apoyarles. No sufran en silencio, que para eso estamos aquí. También, si ustedes necesitan participar en escrito usando los mensajes de chat, también estaremos traduciendo sus mensajes al inglés para que puedan leer sus preguntas o sus comentarios si quieren participar de esa manera. Muchas gracias. All right, so thank you for your patience there. As you can see, we may have Spanish in the room as well. You'll see some translation, and all of this is in honor of language justice.
You just muted yourself, Alejandro, I believe.
Alejandro, you have been muted. You might need to unmute yourself.
Oh, there we go. It looked like
it
was muted accidentally. Were folks able to catch me there in Spanish at least?
You might want to start over with the English portion, Alejandro.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. As I was just sharing, thank you all for prioritizing and committing to language justice. So language justice really means that we all want to engage in the language of our heart and be able to show up who we are. So you'll see translations and interpretation happening today. You may see the presentation in Spanish as well. You'll see chats or questions coming in the chat. We'll translate those into English for everybody else as well. So yeah, just be aware of your pace. We're gonna go ahead and turn it on. So if you're not completely fluent in English and Spanish, after these instructions, not quite yet, but afterwards, you'll see a globe icon appear on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Once you see that globe icon, click on it, select English if that is your preferred language. And then right below that, you can hit mute original audio so that you only listen to the language of your preference. Otherwise, you might hear some Spanish in the background softly. But yeah, if you have any questions or issues with the interpretation or hearing folks in your language, please let us know in the chat and don't suffer in silence. That's why we're here. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back over to you to turn on the interpretation and get us started. Ya vamos a aprender la interpretación.
Thank you, Alejandro. As well, I want to thank Lorenzo as well from the CLC team and all of you. You all are great partners to us as we engage in these types of events at the Colorado Health Foundation. So again, a huge welcome to all of you. I can't exactly see how many have joined us, but I know we had lots of folks registered. We're super excited to spend an hour and a half with you this afternoon. My name is Taryn Fort. I'm the Senior Director of Communications and Influence here at the Colorado Health Foundation. I have a few more welcoming remarks and a few more housekeeping items, and then we'll officially kick off. And I'm actually going to be starting with an important land acknowledgement that we'd like to offer on behalf of the Colorado Health Foundation staff and our board. I'm sure as many of you online with us this afternoon know, in the United States, a land acknowledgement recognizes and respects Native Americans as the traditional stewards of the land that we live on. And this type of acknowledgement also brings, of course, awareness and visibility to the original inhabitants, many of whom are still present in Colorado. You may be joining us this afternoon, working as community leaders who are driving the difficult and necessary work of social change in our communities all over the state. So at our foundation, we believe that keeping equity at the heart of our work will lead Coloradans to better health and well-being. And in that spirit, it's also really important that we understand our state's history and the lived experiences of its inhabitants. We have a set of cornerstones upon which our work is based. Everything we do is, of course, with the intent of creating health equity. And we're also informed by the communities in Colorado and those who we serve, which includes Coloradans who have less power, less privilege and income, with the priority for Coloradans of color. And so as a result of those commitments, we'd like to acknowledge the land that we are on and stand on today, because Indian history is American history, and it's also Colorado's history. And we know that that history is critical to understanding our present day barriers to overall well-being. So I'd like to acknowledge by sharing that as a foundation, we are obviously very committed to building and nurturing relationships with the Native American communities all over Colorado in the pursuit of health equity. And we're of course learning how to do that for many of you who are online with us today and beyond. So thank you for that. And of course, we intend to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So speaking of the Colorado Health Foundation, for those of you who might be a little less familiar with me and the Colorado Health Foundation, I'll turn now to just a little bit more background. Our mission is obviously focused squarely on bringing health and reach for all Coloradans. And we do that work in a whole lot of different ways, predominantly by engaging closely with communities across the state through investing in grant making, through our public policy and advocacy work, through different types of capacity building, and also through moments like this one today, where we're gathered together to discuss and explore complex matters related to inequity in health. So without further ado, I'm super excited to introduce our first 2023 virtual event in the At the Heart of the Matter series. This series features our president and CEO, Karen McNeil-Miller, in conversations with leaders and community members and experts from really all over the country to discuss the impacts of systemic racism on our health. And today we're going to be digging deep into how to use people power to create lasting change. Karen is joined by Eric Liu, who is the co-founder and CEO of the Citizen University to discuss how we can all use that power to deconstruct different systems that maintain these inequities. So a few final housekeeping and accessibility notes for all of you. Again, just a reminder, I see lots and lots of chats going, so everyone's using the chat. We're going to continue to use that throughout the course of the event for any questions or comments that come up. If you haven't shared your name and location yet, please do that. But again, make sure that you're selecting the audience option that's labeled everyone before you hit send so we can all see what you have to say. We are also, of course, offering simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish. So no matter which language you prefer to engage in, make sure that you're selecting the option that works for you, I should say, in the Zoom. And then we do have closed captioning also enabled for accessibility purposes. You may have seen this on the bottom of your screen. If you want to access that feature, click on the captions feature. It's going to be on the bottom of your Zoom screen and select show captions. The opposite of that is going to say hide captions. So you want to make sure that you select show captions to see everything. And then we are, of course, recording today's conversation in English and Spanish. So we'll be sending those recordings out to all of you via email in the next few days. Included in that email is a short evaluation survey. So we really ask that you take a couple of minutes to complete it. We value your thoughts and feedback and look forward to reading more about your experience with us this afternoon. And all of those recordings that I mentioned are also going to be available in the next few days on our website at coloradohealth.org. And because we do have hundreds of you on with us, we have muted all the audio to minimize background noise that might be behind you. And we're also not necessarily featuring a specific Q&A during the during the event this afternoon. So please send your questions and comments throughout the event. We'll do our best to address those. And also let us know if you're having any technical difficulties. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Kerrie Joy. Kerrie is an educator, an artist, an activist, a true magic maker, and a prolific public speaker and poet. And Kerrie is joining us to share a beautiful piece called What Do You Dream? And Kerrie, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Taryn. Good afternoon, lovely people. Thank you so much for taking some time today to really dive into this conversation and hear some constructive ways that we can use our collective power. I was really enjoying reading the chats and seeing everybody's understanding and interpretation of what power is. And so I'm really grateful to just be able to share a piece that I'm hoping will really inspire every single one of you today. As Taryn said, this piece is called What Do You Dream? And it basically comes from the understanding that every single one of us came into this planet, into this realm with power. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what you look like. I understand because of the many isms that exist in this world, it is hard to understand that our power is innate, but I want to remind you that it is, that it lives within you, that it surges within you. And our job is to understand that we are powerful. And the only way to actualize this power is to do it collectively, is to come together to realize what every single one of us have to offer. And so I'm really hoping that this piece will inspire and remind you of what it is that you bring to this world so we can leave it better than we found it. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. Before I do, I want to ask every single one of you, if you are comfortable, if you feel safe, to feel free to close your eyes for a moment and just do a deep breath with me, okay? I'm going to ask you to breathe in, hold it, breathe in through your nose, hold it for 4 seconds, and then breathe out through your mouth. And we're just going to do that a couple of times so that we can center and ground ourselves, okay? So breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. One more time, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. One more time, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. Let's talk about power. Let's talk about power. I think we've all seen it. I think we've all smelled the air. I think we have been believers. I think we were taught fair. I think our instincts, they free us. The truth is somewhere in there. I think the greedy just need us to forget why we are here and that we are full of answers. Celestial pastures of utopia and laughter. Innovation in our DNA, brilliance wrapped in matter. We never ask for too much when what we are truly after is as simple as the haters getting the hell out the way. I've been told that I'm idealistic. Maybe folks just can't relate. I call it like I see it. I know that I walk by faith. I make time like I bake it. My value up like pound cakes. I speak because I'm spoken to. My ancestors in my belly say, rumble, young queen, rumble, but keep the vision steady. I know folks want me sedated. I know my love's a threat, it's heavy. I know the light inside me is flowing. I know I break molds like levees, but I'm not willing to back down. It's fine if they call me crazy, at least I'm not backing down now. I hope I'm fine when they call me crazy, but I think we've all seen it. I think we've walked the streets of gold. I think we all feel it. That clarity within our souls, I think we deserve to live it. That peace that we want to control. I think we know there's more. I think we know there's more. So we dream dreams and we write visions. I said we dream dreams and we write visions. Nothing's what it seems, but we know what's missing. So we dream dreams and we write visions. What do you dream? What do you remember from the realms that you have seen? What is your power telling you that you should be? What do you deserve? What's the missing piece? What is it you've learned? Are you missing peace? Look how hard you've worked, fam. It is okay to reap. What do you dream? How do you know you're scared, but you do it anyway? How do you befriend fear so now you're not afraid? She's just here to teach you that you are here to be great. What do you dream? Make it vivid. Make those dreams clear. That's how we manifest. That's how we bring it here. That's how we endure new days, new weeks, new months, new years. Because I think we've all seen it. We call it nirvana. We call it paradise. We give it a name. We call it intuition. We call it discernment. Some call it insane. But it's what we pursue. It is what we long for. It is what we chase. Because every single one of us know that we can create our heavens today. So let's create them today. What do you dream? Thank y'all so much. I appreciate your time, your energy, and your love. And like I said, I just want to remind every single one of us, the reason we are here as we are talking about these collective visions is because I know that you've seen it somewhere before, somewhere in your spirit, somewhere in your dreams. And I want to invite every single one of you to push, to fight, to work, and to rest to bring these things into reality. Much love and peace.
Kerrie Joy. Come back, Kerrie Joy, come back. I just feel like you just gave us an anthem. And, so where did that come from?
Man, funny enough, I have a lot of these conversations with friends of mine, always just trying to understand, you know, we walk into these spaces, we walk into a lot of these conferences or educational spaces, just trying to discuss how do we move from a place of this deep oppression that we tend to feel into a place of power and liberation. But I think we continue to have these conversations because we know for a fact that we have seen and felt something different. Our spirits are telling us that things can be different. And so I feel like it was just important for me to understand. And I just kind of was hearing my ancestors say, like I said in the poem, I speak because I'm spoken to. I was hearing my ancestors say that every single one of us have experienced what it feels like to be free. We have felt it. We have felt it, but how do we actualize it? And so I want us to understand and tap into that innate power and that innate understanding and that spiritual understanding of who we are so that we can bring it into this natural realm.
Wow. Kerrie Joy, hold on. Eric, join us for a second. Kerrie Joy, you've had a chance to meet Eric Liu briefly.
Yes.
Eric, did you want to comment or ask Kerrie Joy anything about her
Kerrie
presence?
Joy, I'm just so moved. And I don't know if you're tracking the chat, but
I am. I see that.
Yeah, go back and check out all the love you just got.
Yeah,
I
all the
see that.
love, but also all the requests for the text of the words you just shared. And there's just so many things that you said that you're about to see unfold in other ways in the conversation that Karen and I are going to enter into. And this idea that, I mean, it was one of the first words you said, and I just jotted it down here, innate. That power is innate and that it's inherent in us, and that life grinds us down in ways that make us forget it. And art opens up that channel and makes us remember it. And that was just one of the most powerful citizen artist moments I've seen in a while. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Eric. And I'm very excited to hear this conversation. I know it's going to be absolutely incredible to give us the tools and the understanding of how we really make these dreams a reality. So thank you.
Thank you, Kerrie Joy. Eric, welcome.
Karen.
I'll say welcome back.
Yes, indeed.
Let me do a little, just setting the stage for our guest. Welcome, everyone. I'm Karen McNeil-Miller, President and CEO of the Colorado Health Foundation. I have the joy and privilege of serving this organization in this state. And I'm going to have this conversation today. Eric, you can see already that our guests are prolific in their expression of praise and their questions and their thoughts. And I will encourage you all to keep that as we go along. I will try to keep my eye on the chat. We will certainly not get to everyone's questions, but I'll look for themes that we may weave in as our conversation meanders. So welcome, everyone. I'm looking forward to this. You all are at your computers, so you can Google Eric Liu and get the full bio, but I'll just say as introduction here that Eric is the co-founder and CEO of Citizen University, which works to build a culture of powerful and responsible citizenship here in the United States. And Eric also directs the Aspen Institute's Citizenship and American Identity program. Eric is author, writer, speaker, served in President Clinton's administration, was an appointee in the Obama administration, lives with his family in Seattle, and I think that's where he's joining us from today. So, and I say welcome back, Eric, because in 2017, you joined us in in Keystone at our 2017 symposium. And that was the year that we introduced our equity agenda to the state. And you came in and started that conversation and talking about power. And now you're back today to help us delve deeper into it. And I will say a shameless plug is that our 2023 symposium in Keystone this year, which is July 26th through 28th, is focused solely on power. And so we're going to delve into it even deeper. Who has it, how to activate it, how to harness it, and how to help move it for creating equity and justice. And I know, Eric, that there are folks on this call who let us know in advance. I'd say probably a quarter of the folks already know you and your work. But for those who don't, how about just start us off with a primer on your work and your perspective on power?
Sure. And Karen, let me actually start by saying it's great to be back. And both thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to be with this incredible community. I agree. I mean, it is just, it's not just that that folks are prolific in chat. They're passionate about being invited into this space. And I think that's a real testament to what you and your colleagues at the Colorado Health Foundation have been able to set in motion since I was last with you all, and the way in which, I think, and I know that there are folks here, not just from Colorado, but from other states in the neighboring region, recognizing that what CHF has set in motion here is a national pace setter. And I get to say that maybe in a way that you don't as easily, and that's, because you don't have to brag, but I will brag on you, because the work that I do going around the country, working with catalysts of every kind around activating a sense of civic power, people are beginning to recognize the intersection of power and health, civic power and civic health. But you all have been at the cutting edge of that, both awakening and awareness, but also converting awareness into action and into practice. And I think things like the symposium, things like this gathering even, are opportunities for practice. And so I just really, I thank you, and I just salute you all for what you've been doing. And I think in terms of just a primer on our work, so let me back up. So Citizen University we're a nonprofit, we're based in Seattle, we work all around the country. When we speak about citizenship, the name Citizen in Citizen University, we are of course talking about something that is other than documentation status and United States passport holding status. But we mean the deeper ethical sense of being a member of the body, this kind of more capacious sense of, do you contribute, do you connect, or do you feel a sense of belonging and responsibility in community? And as we talked about years ago when I was with you last, we have this conception in our work that to understand citizenship in this broader capacious sense as through this equation, which is power plus character equals citizenship. That to live like a citizen in this deeper sense requires both a fluency in power and a grounding in civic character, kind of the values and norms of being not just for oneself. And on the power half of that equation, which I think is the focus of both, what we're talking about here today, but what you all are building toward in your symposium in July, we define power in a very simple way, which is power is the capacity to ensure that others do as you would like them to do. And for some people, that definition is a little bit like, ew, that's kind of yucky, right? That sounds like manipulation and, domination and, Game of Thrones or House of Cards or some kind of, scheming. But if we are just honest, you don't even have to get that real, just honest about kind of looking around at our lives in every circle of our lives, every circle of relationship, whether it's civic or work or family or neighbor or, faith community or whatever it might be. We are human, and humans are wired always to want other humans to do as we would like them to do. That's just what it means to be a social animal. And that capacity, when brought to bear on questions of common concern in public life and civic issues, is what you can call civic power, right? And civic power takes a number of forms that we name, none of which are kind of new to anybody, but the naming of them is important because the naming is part of that literacy, that fluency that I was describing. That civic power takes the form of the power of people, the power of ideas, the power of force and muscle, the power of social norms and our attitudes and our ability to determine by norms what's okay and what's right and what's not. Our power of the capacity to activate state action, to move government. There are all these different sources of power, and what we teach in our work at Citizen University is a set of laws that govern the way that power flows in our lives. And the word that I fixated on when we were hearing Kerrie Joy's poem, that word innate was really key to me, because one of the fundamental lessons we teach about power is that power is a gift. It is a gift in multiple senses. It is a gift in that it is a thing we are innately born with. It inheres in us. It is a gift like life is a gift, right? It is a gift also in the sense of it being a talent. People have different forms of talent, some people's power is in their creative and artistic expression, like Kerrie Joy, her ability both to hear ancestors and then to kind of speak ancestors to prosperity, right, to posterity. Other people's gifts of power are the ability to really be planfully organizing and mobilizing people in a way that kind of gets you from step A to step B. But these gifts are part of our talent set. But the third and most important way in which power is a gift is simply this: we're always giving it away. It is something that we have, and yet we are most of the time unconscious of it. And most of the time, unwittingly, unthinkingly, we are just giving it away. And we give that away 100 different ways. We give that away every time we can't be bothered to vote. We give it away every time we hear someone saying something, borderline objectionable about a disfavored group, and we don't actually do anything or intervene. We give it away when we see somebody being picked on the bus for wearing a certain form of clothing, or a certain, dressing a certain way, or seeming to be part of a certain ethnic group, and we move on by because that's not our problem, right? We're giving away our power continuously. And part of our core notion, what was so resonant about what Kerrie Joy said, is this idea that in the first place, if you want to get fluent in power, we've got to get comfortable naming and claiming it, right? And so if you had any discomfort with that definition that I said there at the outset, my watchword always is get over it. Because if you have kind of qualms, power, that's kind of this, that's the dirty word. That's, all of our associations with power, about power mad, power hungry, power trip, they're all negative. And you think, power is for those bad people over there who are manipulating politics or kind of rigging the game one way or another. And guess what? The people who are manipulating systems and rigging the game against you would love nothing more than for you to say power's for somebody else. It's not my thing, right? And I think the first commitment that we've got to make, and what this conversation is about, is that willingness to name and to claim it. Once you name and you claim it, then there's a whole set of strategies and a whole set of laws of power that we can get into more, Karen, as we talk, that we try to teach in our work at Citizen University, that most of the people in this Zoom room intuit on one level or another, practice in one way or another. But again, I think the being explicit about it in community, so that we can keep practicing the thing that some of us do by accident, so that we can do on purpose the things that we might do unintentionally, is the point of a gathering like this.
Yes, thank you. And let's spend a few minutes unpacking some of what you just said. And this notion that it feels, for some folks, it feels smarmy, this notion of power, that it's a negative connotation. But how do we get to the place that we can own that we have power? What does one have to do if one thinks they have no power? How do you activate that? And how do you get that recognition for yourself?
Yeah. So I think your question is interesting both on the mindset level and on the transition from self/individual to other/collective, right? Because I think that's both. People come to this question not in the abstract, but thinking about themselves. And when you think about yourself and you say, well, I don't have any power, right? This is an interesting topic. I'm glad I'm joining this Lunch and Learn, but that's not for me. I don't have power. Not true. I think everybody in this room right now, if you were to take a silent inventory of the forms of power you have, you would have something other than zero. If you were to name the people you know and your ability to organize and mobilize other people, if you were to describe the ways in which you have the capacity to frame new narratives, to put new ideas out there in a way that kind of become contagious and change the way people think about topics, including power. If you took a tally and inventory of your connections to your ability to move government and state action, and just by virtue of the fact that you're in this Zoom room and connected to the Colorado Health Foundation, you already are connected to the power to move government. So if you take that inventory, you realize, there's a lot here, right? There is a there's a little mound of capital that I have, ideas capital, intellectual capital, relationship capital. And that is true whether you are poor, whether you are marginalized, whether you are a native English speaker or not. I don't care what the forms of social disadvantage are that in fact define a lot of your opportunity set. The fact is each of us has more than zero power. And that recognition is part of the owning that you're talking about, Karen, like owning it. You got to own that, right? And when we own that and we think about that kind of that inventory, for some of us, it's a small little pile. For others of us, it's a much larger pile. But once you take stock of the kinds of power that you have and have access to, then you face a very simple binary choice. Shall I hoard or shall I circulate? Right? And that's it. And most people in a zero-sum time like ours, in a scarcity-minded time like ours, where people are afraid of falling behind and afraid that if someone's getting something and moving ahead, that must mean I'm falling behind. The instinct to hoard is very strong, right? I know how to move things in society. I know how to get people to listen to you. I know how to change narratives in the media or whatever it might be. But why would I share that? Why would I tell anybody else that, right? That's for me to know so that I can help me and my kind. And that choice to hoard is the opposite of the choice to circulate. And the argument that I want to make and that we make in our work and that you make in yours, Karen, is that to circulate power, to choose intentionally once you take inventory of what you've got and to recognize I've got to put that into the community, I've got to circulate that, is not some act of altruistic sacrifice. It's not like, oh, come take advantage of me, everybody. I want to just share my forms of power and influence and knowledge and relationships and whatever I can bring to bear. It is actually that only by sharing it, only by circulating it, do you grow it, right? And only by putting it into action in the company of others do you actually make your power, your personal power, something that matters. And I want to say again, this can sound to some ears like, wow, like just not in touch and tune with the incredible deep structural inequities that Coloradans face. It is, it's wholly in touch with those inequities. And I think if you take any concrete instantiation of this, let's take voting for one, right? People will often say, well, what's the point in voting? My vote doesn't count. No one listens to me. No one listens to me because I'm fill in the blank, because I'm young, because I'm of brown skin, because I'm not a native English speaker, because I'm, whatever it might be, because I'm a political minority. What's the point? And the thing that I have to say to folks like that at all times is there's no such thing as not voting. Not voting is voting. Right. Not voting is voting to hand your power over to someone else who will use your voice and your vote in their name, in their interests, which are often inimical to your own, right? So not voting is actively choosing to wear a sign on your back that says, kick me, and a t-shirt that says on the front, chump. You're announcing to the world that you want people to do you harm, right? And that doesn't mean that the inverse is simply true, that if all you do is think about power and imagine yourself to be power, that you make yourself power. It isn't merely a matter of simple manifestation, but it does matter to begin with mindset, to own what you've got and to recognize that what you've got is not a 1 + 1 + 1 when you join with others, but it's a 1 and then a 10 and then 100, it's powers of 10 for every time you connect with somebody else. And the ability of 2 or 3 people to raise a question in a community about why is our drinking water so unsafe, rather than just one person wondering that in isolation. The power of 3 or 5 or 10 people organizing to say, why is it that we have only fast food options and live in such a food desert for fresh and healthy food options that are affordable in our part of Colorado, is an order of magnitude more powerful than you just working in isolation. The power of 100 or 1,000 people in Colorado saying that, hey, why is it that only people in Denver or in Aspen or in Vail get to have access to these kinds of conversations? Why isn't it that in rural Colorado? Why isn't it that in, people in places in other counties where people are just as hungry for advancement and connection, why can't we connect to these deeper opportunities? When those thoughts that come into our minds in isolation are actually expressed and then activated into collective action, that's when we actually find how powerful we can be.
Mhm. And so part of what you just said is that it's a mind shift, a mindset shift, whether it's about ourselves individually or about our community, to shift from the absence and scarcity mindset to a presence and abundance mindset.
That's right. And I think, and again, I don't want to, you remember like a decade ago or something, there was that thing, early internet thing called The Secret, and it was going all around, this just kind of thing about you can become wealthy if you just like imagine abundance,
Right.
right? That's not what I'm talking about,
Yes.
right? This is not just like wish upon a star, right? I mean, shift that mindset like you're talking about. That's only step one. That is necessary but insufficient, right? From that necessary step then comes the actual practice. What do we do to build this muscle? What do we do to actually make mutual commitments with each other in ways that actually change the game on the ground, right? And I think this is, yeah.
You said several times, you use the phrase power fluent, becoming fluent in power, and said on the negative side that you talk about in your book is like power illiteracy. So what is it? Why is it important? And what's the effect if we aren't literate?
Yeah. Well, I think, the literacy is actually, again, when most people have this allergic reaction to, I don't want to talk about power, it's either dirty or it sounds kind of un-American to be so nakedly candid about power, because what it means, if you're talking about power, you're talking about inequality. If you're talking about power, you're talking about how some have more than others. And that's not naturally where we go as Americans. As Americans, we go, and especially, we who are in the American West, go to a place of rugged individualism. Like, it's just a matter of my grit. And if I can do it, and if I can pull myself up by my bootstraps, and if I can just persist, I can make it in America, right? That is the dominant narrative that we have here. And to admit that, you know what, I've been yanking in my bootstraps for a long time and things are still hard. The American culture right now makes us think that I am a failure because of that. We don't get to think about, talk about, question the ways in which maybe there are structural forces at work here. Maybe there are larger patterns that are keeping me from climbing, moving, changing my opportunity set. And so that mindset shift is not just about the ways in which power is, a gift, or power is something that we can kind of believe in here, but it is more deeply about recognizing this notion, as you're saying, that we've got to learn how to read and write power. It is a literacy. I don't mean this even as a metaphor. I mean it literally. There's a language of power. If you've been reading and tracking the chat, a lot of people are expressing different aspects of this language of power. Power with, power over. Power as domination, power as, revolution, right? People are expressing forms of language that capture a lot of what it is that, in this book of mine about power, you're more powerful than you think, that we tried to distill into 3 laws of power and 9 strategies of power. But that language of power is important because, it's just like anything else, right? Let's take the topic that is at the heart of the work that you do, Karen. It's one thing for us to acknowledge that health is important, right? Yes, all things being equal, people would rather have good health than poor health, right? But people don't naturally know, unless they actually intentionally gain a literacy. They don't naturally know what are the measures of good or better health, and what are the steps that I can take personally to move toward good or better health. And then what are the structural impediments, the communal and civic and policy frameworks that steer me toward good or worse health, right? You may not know that. And if you're just growing up and just trying to make it as a family, eating fast food and getting your junk food, in between meals, because that's what's available, that's what's cheap, that's what helps you make rent, you're not thinking about asking those larger questions of why is it that this is the cheap food that I can afford? Why is it that the things that I can afford are the things that will kill me? You're not thinking about that. You're just living your life. But if you gain that literacy and asking yourself those questions, first on the level of health, like, why is it that I'm eating this stuff? Why is it that my habits are what they are? You can change your habits and change your possibilities in terms of physical and mental health. But then that translates immediately these larger questions of asking why. Why is it? How did it become that my part of town doesn't have access to good food? Why is it that my part of town doesn't have access to mass transit so that I can get to places where I can get affordable, healthy food? Why is it that nobody in my community ever actually encourages young people to move and to exercise? Why is it that there are no conversations in my ethnic community where mental illness is stigmatized? Why is it that there are no structures in my community that make it safe for us to talk about these things, right? These are matters of literacy. These are matters of learning how to read and write power. And when I talk about this, in the same way that I was inviting each of you to kind of make a mental tally of the forms of power that you have, I invite you also to draw a power map of yourself and your community, right? And, you know, someone's saying in chat right now, in a community that has been wallowing in hopelessness ever since coal mining has ended. Others of you will talk about the ways in which, you know, and that's a common thing all across Colorado and the United States, resource economies that now have to shift to something else. You know, you have in communities like Adams County, exurban rural communities that are shifting and changing, and you have a lot of tension and conflict between newcomers and long-timers, and all these ways in which people, if you were to draw a map of power in your community, you're part of Colorado or, you know, other states where folks may be from in this Zoom room, and actually draw that map. Who has the sources of money? Who has the ability to influence narratives and change the story about who we are as a community? Who is not only who is in government and how, you know, who legislates on the city council or whatever, but who has the ability to make those legislators actually do what you want them to do, right? The central question of all civic power, Karen, is this: who decides? Who decides? And once you start kind of pulling that string, peeling that onion of who decides, a map reveals itself. And that map is bigger than just the org chart of your city council, right? That map then becomes who has influence, not just who has money influence, but who are the elders in your community that people always listen to and turn to? You know, who are the people, the faith leaders who, after a mass shooting, people come to not only for solace, but for organizing to kind of, you know, change the ways in which we stop tolerating this epidemic of gun violence. And that map has people and sources that I think are so, you know, that once we draw it, we realize it. But when we don't draw it, when we don't make that explicit effort to read and write that map of power, well, let me put it this way. When we don't try explicitly to read a map of power, we have no chance of writing ourselves into it. The only way to rewrite that map and to write ourselves in is to understand both that landscape and to understand what forms of power we have. And I think this is, you know, you can have in the moment, you know, after a police killing of an unarmed Black man, you can join in the instant, in the day or two that follows, a street, you know, a gathering, a vigil, a protest, right? And we are moved to do things like that. But until and unless we gain collectively deeper literacy in how power works, all that's going to happen is you're going to have that day or two of vigil and protest, and then everybody will recede back to their everyday life of eating this and taking it, right? But when we begin to organize in different ways and say, what are the forms of collective pressure that we can bring to bear on lawmakers, on the police, on the community, on elders, on the younger folks in the community who do know better and can be norm setters themselves, right? How do we change these things? That's the work that has to follow. And that's not intuitive. That's not as natural and intuitive as getting up, answering the Facebook call and going to the vigil, right? That requires intentional cultivation, which is why we call our organization Citizen University. This is people teaching people the stuff that that we all ought to know as self-governing members of a community that is supposed to be democratic.
I hope you're following the chat. What you just said is resonating with folks. I want to get to in a moment more of the how we activate power in our communities, because I've met most of the folks on this call are folks who are trying to affect community change with members of their community and on behalf of their community. So we want to get to that. I want to take you back to 2017 when you spoke to us then. And I rewatched the video of that last night. And so in 2017, you said that we are in a moment of profound inequity. Now, moment is a relative term to the time, the moment a child takes his first steps is like that. The moment that was the pandemic was a few years. So I'm assuming you still stand by it. You still would say the same thing. We're a moment of profound inequity, but every moment has a beginning, middle, and end. Where do you think we are in this moment of profound inequity? Are we still at the beginning? We're at the middle, towards the end? Where are we?
That's a great question. And the premise is great too. I love your statement. The elasticity of a moment is exactly right, right? The moment that I described in 2017, if I recall, was this moment, this period that we're in, which is comparable and most comparable to the period that preceded the Great Depression. We have not seen in our country levels of economic inequality, concentration of wealth, concentration of political clout and voice to this degree. It hasn't been this bad since it was in the 1920s, right? And that wasn't, if you're thinking about this from a social science standpoint, that's not just correlation, that's causation, right? When you get things that unequal, that tipped over, that imbalanced, the system cannot stand. It will collapse, right? And that is true economically, and it is true politically. And so we are absolutely still in that moment of inequality, but I think we're in the thick, messy middle of it right now, and I think, this moment, I think, is a generational moment, one in which, if you rewind back to 2010 and, the emergence, if you rewind to the period after the financial crisis and the Great Recession and the ways in which that yielded, angry populism on both the left and the right. It yielded the Tea Party emerging. It yielded Occupy Wall Street. Each of those in turn, yielded other movements. In one case, the Trump phenomenon. In another case, the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. And each of those in turn has kind of yielded other forms of resistance and revulsion at the level of inequity and change or loss, right? Inequity is not just kind of, oh, I feel that this is a very bad situation as I look at this thing over there. Inequity and this kind of imbalance is something that people feel in their bones. And that's true both for the people who are getting squeezed and jammed, and for the people who feel anxious because they don't want to get squeezed or jammed, right? That sense of remembering that in a time like this, you recognize that, at the heart of all civic power, if the question is who decides, the dynamic that drives so much civic power in a democracy is status. And all status is relative, right? And so when we feel like people are leaving us behind, when we feel like things are changing in a way that are making my life seem less full of promise, it's cold comfort. It is no consolation at all to be reminded that, well, you may be poor in America right now, but even the poorest in America today are 100 times wealthier than the poor in America, 100 years ago. Who cares, right? We're not living through 100 years ago. We're living through right now. And right now, this status anxiety and this pressure that I feel is about this level of inequity. I think we're in the middle of it because we've begun this reckoning. The politics have yielded this kind of explosive response, not always a constructive response, but it's yielded this kind of, anti-establishment, anti-elite feeling across the left and the right of, we're tired of the people who've been setting up and structuring this game in a way that has made things feel so rigged against us. And when you add into that the dynamics of race, it has become that much more volatile, right? The fact that this reckoning and awakening around economic inequality has coincided not only with the pandemic, but then with the murder of George Floyd and everything that has subsequently unfolded since then, you realize we have this incredible set of cross currents here, where people are trying to find and claim place in ways that are, the only thing that unites Americans right now is how disrespected everybody feels. The polling firm More in Common, the public opinion research firm More in Common, did this incredible research about a year ago that found that across every single demographic, young, old, Republican, Democrat, urban, rural, white, non-white, the one theme, that the only through line was that everybody's feeling disrespected right now. And that is the hallmark of a society whose measures of status are in flux, right? And so I think this is a time right now where we're awake to the fact that everything's changing. And that's farther along than when I was with you in 2017. But now we have I think there's a sense of urgency here. In this messy middle, we get to kind of decide which way are we going to go? Out of periods like this, it's not this bad, but I think about periods like the 1930s in Weimar Republic, Germany, where there was messiness, there was a loss of authority, there was disillusionment and disenchantment, there was inflation like crazy, there was people giving up on each other and on the systems. And I think about the same period in the United States, right? In Germany during that time, they turned in one direction toward fascism. They turned toward somebody who could offer clarity, order, simple solutions, and the purifying promise of getting rid of all the people who they were scapegoating as the cause of these problems. The Jews, the bankers, the dirty non-Aryans, right? In the United States, we turned slightly in a different direction, toward a kind of populism that was going to hold us together, toward a sense of we're going to recommit to the idea that the system can and should work for folks. Now, looking back from a perspective of 2023, we can say, well, that was true mainly for white people, that the New Deal wasn't for people, Karen, like you and me, right? Literally cut out people like you and me. But relative to where it could have gone in 1933 in the United States, we made a different choice. We made a choice that made it possible 2, 3, 4 generations down the road for you and me to be sitting here in conversations right now, right? And so we're in a moment right now that is a pivot point moment, deep enough along in this reckoning with inequity and inequality, in this transformation of demographics where whiteness and Americanness are detaching, and many white people are freaked out about that. Many people of color, want the power and respect that should come with being and becoming a majority of Americans, and yet are frustrated and angry that still in institution after institution, we may have larger numbers, but we still have the smaller share of actual respect and power and dignity, right? And so all of this adds to this turbulence right now that puts us in the depths of this moment and puts us in a moment of choice. And this is why, like, our conversation, the symposium you're doing this summer, these next couple of years are the pivot. And it's why I feel this urgency, like we've got to learn right now, we've got to connect with each other, and we've got to find ways. This isn't just the kind of cliche of we got to save democracy right now. Like, whoo, we almost lost democracy in 2020. No, yes, but we're almost losing democracy still. And we were almost losing democracy all during the Obama years, right? I'm an Obama fan, but all during the Obama years, the sicknesses were there. Inequality deepened and worsened during the Obama years, just as they did during the Trump years. So I don't care what your party is. This is a time right now for recognizing that in a cross-ideological way, we have had a set of choices in this country, policy choices, cultural choices, narrative choices about who gets to run things, that as a society, we are discarding the old, but not yet actually naming the new, right? And we get to choose whether that new thing is going to look like an authoritarian, fascist-friendly approach to the new, or to a new recommitment to the old promises of what the American creed can actually offer us if we ever lived up to it.
I thought we were on the verge of a sub moment when we had the collision of COVID and the racial reckoning in 2020. I thought maybe we're going to get some help with this now. And, you know, every corporation put out these beautiful statements, as did foundations, as did not-for-profits. And the Center for Creative Leadership just recently reviewed all the corporate statements that were made and then looked to follow up to see how did they do anything with it. And I don't know the right number because I don't want to get it wrong, but it was a very minuscule number of those corporations that actually followed up with any of those promises they made in 2020. And I imagine if we did the same thing for foundation promises and nonprofit promises around equity and inclusion and justice, the number might be a little bit higher, but I don't think it would be much higher. And so what happened is what you just described is people showed up in that moment and now have retreated back to their norm. And so the fresh troops I thought we were getting didn't show up. And so for me, it's just a reminder that it's always just been us that's going to have to do it.
Yeah.
It's always just been us. It's still just us that has to do it.
You know, Karen, I both hear you and I feel you. I feel when you say, you know, when you just said those words, I feel that sense of both, you know, a combination of grief and resolve, right? That, and I only want to add to it the possibility that, you know, we can keep growing that us. And I think you know, you're absolutely right. That moment passed, and, you know, we all watched the Super Bowl last week, right? And, you know, in both end zones, and racism, like, great, you know, like, you know, we've gotten to where there's just, you know, there's so much of at the institutional level, there is so much of the merely performative. You know, let's change a statement, let's put words on a slogan. You know, I think, you know, and we're at an opportunity, we have an opportunity now to push deeper and to go past that. We opened today with a land acknowledgement, right? And I think, look, I have mixed feelings about land acknowledgements, to be honest with you, as they are currently done. As compared to what we used to do 10 years ago, in which we didn't have land acknowledgements, sure, it is progress to name and recognize this. But the problem is that in so many settings, particularly progressive settings, it has become just this kind of throat clearing, you know, performative thing at the outset. And this is not to criticize this institution. It's just, you know, everything I'm involved in does something like this. But I think the question now is, okay, and is to go beyond the land acknowledgement to the kind of work that the Colorado Health Foundation is actually doing, to ask, in addition to acknowledging the first peoples who lived on and made this land something, how are we today institutionally investing in the power and the capacity of those Native peoples in this place? How are we actually telling and elevating the stories of the ways in which Native communities are still shaping and still forcing the rest of society to live up to its promises, right? To me, a land acknowledgement should always be coupled then with a power commitment, like what we're going to do, and here's what we've been doing, right? And I think that idea is just what, you know, CHF has been doing in the ways that you all work in Indian country and you work in tribal communities around the region. And I think, you know, anybody who has dealt with issues of health inequities knows that this is, you know, you have both the kind of most salient cases of challenge and the most kind of rich opportunities for remedy in Native communities. And so let's actually convert these, you know, these rituals, these kind of, you know, end racism in the end zone kind of things into, okay, well, what are we going to do? You know, NFL can end racism by getting 5 more Black GMs and, you know, 10 more Black head coaches, right? That would help end racism in the United States, you know? But I want to go back to a word that you used just a moment ago, Karen, when you said this, when you were talking about these foundation and other institutional commitments, you used the word promise, and all these promises that were made, right? And how disillusioned in a way you were from the promises made after the George Floyd murder and reckoning to where we are today. And I guess I would just draw a very direct analogy. Those promises are not just like, they are in fact the promises of the American creed. When I say American creed, what do people think? If you just think of American words, American promises, liberty, equal justice under law, equal protection of the laws, right? All men are created equal. Promises, government of the people, by the people, for the people, not, as someone said in chat, of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations, right? You think about these kind of keyword phrases of the American creed. Each of those phrases is a promise. And as bitter as we may be, and as disillusioned as we may be, we still believe in those promises, actually. We do. None of us, not all of us in this room may be immediately reflexively like flag waving in a jingoistic way, but we all deeply love our country enough to be angry that we still have broken these promises, that we still have failed to live up to these promises. And that is something, because in other societies, they don't have those promises and they don't feel angry when those promises are broken. They just accept this as life and fate, and this is how it is. That's Russia. That's China, where my ancestors are from. That's India. That's lots of parts of Europe right now, right? This idea of, this is just the hand we've been dealt. I'm just going to take it and just grind through and keep my head down and take care of me and my own, right? But in the United States, we get mad when we see the ways in which when we see that gap between our institutions and our ideals, and that between our creed and our deeds. And all of American life is about trying to close that creed-deed gap, right? If we show up. And that's why power literacy matters. And so for us, I think that idea of the promise, don't treat a promise as, so yes, a promise was made and then everybody kind of backed away from it. That is the nature of promise keeping and promise making. That none of this was a straight line. And I draw inspiration over and over again from periods in our history, Karen. And I think about, the 1870s, right? So the 1868, you get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the Reconstruction Amendments, to end slavery, to give the formerly enslaved Black people of the country the citizenship, and then to make them eligible to vote, right? And these were huge monumental steps in the literal reconstruction of our Constitution and this whole experiment. But then just a few years later, you realize, oh, all those promises, those new promises just enshrined in these new amendments to the Constitution, people are ignoring them. People are undermining them. People, North and South, are finding ways to subvert them. And by 1877, both white people in both the North and the South had gotten tired of all this work to do Reconstruction, gotten tired of all this effort to try to help support the freedmen, the freedmen's bureaus, all this stuff. And they were just like, you know what, can't we just get along and reunite? And the white people of the North and the South, they did. They came together in reunion by selling, Black people back down the river, right? And just subverting all those promises. And so you get to 1877, 1878, I think about someone who was our age at that time, full of hope and full of promise. And then seeing all the ways in which everything receded. And guess what happened after that? Out of that era, in the late 1890s, in the early 1900s, out of that era came W.E.B. Du Bois. Out of that era came, Ida B. Wells. Out of that era came the formation of the NAACP. Out of that era came all of this recommitment to organizing. And yeah, some of it had that sad, somewhat resigned resolve that you expressed just a moment, that there's only just us, right? That's what Du Bois and other folks had to say when they looked around that small table to say, it's only going to be just us, right? But then they said, at least we got us and let's get going back to work, right? And I think that is the part of history here. And I think that sense in which, that movie that's an Oscar nominee right now, Everything Everywhere All at Once, like that's it right now. Like we're having everything everywhere all at once. There is progress, there is regress. There are people like us claiming power. There are people like us getting stripped of power. And the thing that we've got to do in a room like this is treat this not just as a professional development learning opportunity, but as a moral recommitment, right? And so, you know, I want to, in a moment, talk a little bit about some of the programs we've got at Citizen University by way of inviting folks into some opportunities to turn that spirit of recommitment into practice and action, you know, in the parts of the community where you live. But I absolutely think that, you know, some of these comments in chat are right. You know, broken treaties are absolutely the instantiation of broken promises. And, you know, so are these new form, you know, to me, you know, if we want to go back to land acknowledgements, check out the land back movement. The land back movement is saying, you know, let's not just kind of point out the brokenness of these treaties. Let's actually start forcing American jurisdictions to honor those treaties. Let's get land back, right? And that kind of organizing is the kind of organizing that everybody has to be able to, whatever your issue, whatever your politics, has to be able to recommit to right now.
So I want, and as you respond to this next question, weave in the Citizen University. I don't know if you remember the movie The Color Purple, and there's the scene when Celie gets all the letters that her sister Nettie wrote her that had been hidden in the closet, and she looks at Shug Avery and she says, "What else gonna do?" So now that's what I'm asking you, Eric. What else gonna do?
So here's where we start. I think in the first place, when you see something like the chat that's just blooming throughout this whole time together here, you realize how hungry people are for invitation to connect. And, you know, the first thing we all have to do, and this is, you know, when you spoke a moment ago, Karen, about it's just us, we have to invite more people into the us. Moments, blips of crisis can bring a lot of, you know, interested bystanders into intersection with our work. Most of those interested bystanders will go back onto the sidelines. But if we keep on extending invitations, we can expand that us. And the spirit of invitation is key, I think. You know, my friend Vivian Phillips here, who I think I spoke about back in 2017, who's an artist, an arts organizer here in Seattle, part of the revitalization of Central District here in Seattle, which is the historically African-American community here. You know, she has often spoken in white nonprofit art settings about stop talking about underserved communities. Stop saying the word underserved. The underserved are the uninvited, right? And so changing our mindset to how can we start actively, creatively, in relevant terms, invite people into the circle more, into conversations like this, into the work that each of us does. Who's not there and how can we invite? That's number one, thinking about invitation. Number two is thinking about things to invite them to, right? And, you know, here's where I want to tell folks about two things we've got going at Citizen University. So for years, we've been running something at the national level that you can think of as kind of a mutual aid society of civic innovators. It's called the Civic Collaboratory. And it is across every sector and silo of civic work, from education to immigrant rights, to veterans work, to voting reform, to, you know, you name it. It's across the ideological spectrum, and it is every region of the country. And this group has been meeting for over a dozen years, 3 or 4 times a year. And the reason why we call it Mutual Aid Society is that at the heart of every meeting, we have this format called the Rotating Credit Club, which is kind of an adaptation of a lending circle, right? Of that kind of format that that goes back. It goes back to the indigenous traditions. It goes back to what you know, free blacks did during the age of slavery, and what you know, recently liberated, formerly enslaved black people did to form collective power and wealth. It goes to what every immigrant community has had to do in this country. The Rotating Credit Club is a format in which at every meeting, members of the group take turns presenting to the full group some project they're working on, what are we going to do next, right? Something that they've been trying to advance. And the rest of the group has to offer not critique or commentary, but hard commitments of help, investments of capital of every kind, relational, institutional, intellectual, financial. There are funders who are part of this. And why do you do that? Why do you make commitments to somebody you just met at that meeting? Because what goes around comes around. There's a norm here that we will not hoard, we will circulate, right? And we will circulate. By continually circulating, we will build a different kind of culture and a different kind of practice. And we've done that nationally in a way that has helped form a sense of movement, an ecosystem of people who care about civic renewal and bottom-up change, and the combination of kind of civic empowerment and civic health in all different kinds of settings. Well, over the last few years now, we've begun to pilot adapting that format in a place-based way, rooted locally. We started it in Chicago. We brought it to Atlanta. Charlotte's next. In Arizona, a combination of both Phoenix and rural communities are going to undertake this. And I want to invite you, Karen, and the Colorado Health Foundation, but also any of you who are in this room to think about joining us in activating local civic collaboratories in your communities. We have a program where we will bring you out to Seattle, train you for a few days on this format, invite you to experience one of our national collaboratories so you see the power of this mutual commitment making, and then support you as you go back to your communities to invite other folks into that circle to get some mutual aid ecosystem going there, right? One of the features of the pandemic era has been everybody started talking about mutual aid, right? That term got a lot more popular. But honestly, most of what passed for mutual aid during the pandemic was just online bulletin boards, people posting needs and posting opportunities, but not this relational practice of commitment, recommitment. And at the collaboratory, every time you make a commitment of help to somebody else, you literally, as a matter of ritual, begin with the words, I commit. And there's something powerful in doing that. Like, I commit to connecting you with this funder. I commit to helping bring to bear my strategic planning expertise on your venture. I commit to helping you reach people in this community of color that would benefit from the power of your project, right? So I think this invitation is something that I want to extend, and I think this idea of participation. And Jalissa, I see your note there in chat. I think the reality for you, it is the reality for you in this sense. Everybody can invite somebody else into a circle of power building. Everybody who's in this room today, I may be preaching to the converted in this room, but each of you now can go forth and create your own choir and your own circle of other people to practice some of what we're talking about, to create a circle of asking who has power in my community and who does not. How can we change this? How can we get more literate in the ways to change the equation and the game and the story of power in our place? And that is, in our work, we get to a lot of things where there's a lot of skills and a lot of, expertise involved. But the most basic level comes down to, and the most simple answer, I guess, Karen, to your question of, what are we gonna do next is join a club. Join a club or start a club. That is the most important thing that any of us can do right now in this time where social media, economic inequality, the nature of life post-pandemic is for us to be more and more isolated, more and more alone, more and more segregated, doing more and more stuff mediated like this, but actually joining and forming clubs, rebuilding the muscle of association, right? Rebuilding that muscle of inviting 1, 2, 3, 5 other people into some common endeavor, some way of working together. That's not rocket science, right? You don't need a PhD. You just need some will and some invitation and some ability to kind of keep on organizing and keep on inviting and not to get discouraged when only 2 people show up, when only 3 people accept that invitation, right? So Jalissa, you absolutely have this power. And I don't know your form of work, but you absolutely have this capacity to unlock this spirit and this practice with others. But I think the mutual aid format that I'm talking about is a way in which when you create this as a matter of regular structure in your community, you give people a club and a pathway. Okay, every month we're going to join this thing. And we're going to do this practice of just actually connecting and supporting each other that way. And since you're saying preach, I'll say the last thing, the invitation I'll offer here. We have another program in our work at Citizen University called Civic Saturdays. Some of the folks in this room might actually have participated. We've worked with folks in Adams County, folks in Fort Collins, folks all across the state on this. Civic Saturdays are gatherings that are happening all around the country that are basically a civic equivalent to a faith gathering. It's not church, it's not mosque or synagogue, but on purpose, it has the flow and the feel of a faith gathering like that. Why? Because democracy itself requires our belief and our faith, not in a God or a deity, but in each other. Democracy works only if enough of us believe democracy works, right? And that's what we're living through right now. Democracy is like money that way, right? There's nothing magical about a rectangular piece of green paper with the number 10 or 20 on it that makes us treat that $10 or $20 bill as something of value. Nothing makes that thing have value except a millionfold mutual agreement that we've all made silently and we've all sustained that thing should mean something, right? It's just the same with our democracy. A millionfold mutual agreement that the Constitution, another rectangular piece of paper, should mean something, right? And we are living through a time where people are no longer believing. And so we started these Civic Saturday gatherings, not just to kind of force belief on people and to scold people into believing harder, but rather to invite people into a space where we can do a bit of what we've been doing here, to talk about our doubts, to talk about our fear, to talk about how we've lost faith in the promises of this country and our community. But then by naming that and making it safe and possible for us to name that, to realize we're not alone in that. And that when we're not alone in that, we're also not alone in the remedy. We're not alone in our capacity to create a new alternative, right? And so we've got a civic seminary program where we are training catalytic people, just like everybody in this Zoom room today, to lead these gatherings, these Civic Saturday gatherings in your communities around the country. And so I want to invite folks as well into that. And these are just two examples of the kind of work that we do, but the kinds of work that all of you are doing in Colorado, in Texas, in Oklahoma, other parts of the country who are just trying to connect these dots. I hope so fervently that you will not only kind of carry some of the ideas that we've talked about here around power, and not only carry the spirit and the kind of feeling that I don't need to give up, that there's no such thing as not voting, no such thing as not participating, but also recommit yourself to practice. Practice, right? This is practice, just like religion is practice, just like medicine is practice, just like baseball or ballet is practice, right? This is democracy is practice. And we have to recommit ourselves to joining in circles, study circles and practice circles, where we can keep on talking about power, keep on figuring out how we use each other as case studies. Well, let's talk about how you're doing stuff in Colorado Springs. Well, let's talk about how it's going over here, in Denver. Let's talk about how that's happening and convert those forms of mutual learning and mutual practice into collective power building.
And I'm going to ask one last question, Eric, before we run out of time. And it's really to kind of bring Jalissa's question up another level or two. And that I know lots of folks that are on this Zoom call struggle with. We're all great when we're talking to each other and in our own echo chamber, but how do we bring along, how do we invite folks who don't believe that there's rampant racism, that don't believe there's structural inequity, that don't believe, that think that you're the victim of your own behavior. If there's an inequity, it's because of something you did or didn't do. Personally, how do we bring along and invite the people that are hoarding power?
Yes, what an important question. And I guess I would start most foundationally with open up a conversation with them about what they believe and why, about how their worldview is shaped, about their values. And not a question, and open it up as a conversation, not where you're going to play gotcha, not where they're going to feel like you're trying to ambush them, or you're looking for a weakness to attack them, or you're trying to win the debate. Take winning off the table. Try in an open-hearted way. I want to understand, how did you come to your worldview that this is a world in which every man can make it on his own, and that's probably how they'd say it, if he just works hard enough, right? Tell me. And what you'll get when you ask that question, when you draw that story out, what you'll get is you'll pop that person back from a two-dimensional caricature of the kind that social media and our political culture tend to create back into a complex three-dimensional human being. And you'll find when they answer that question that they had a life experience early on that you can relate to. Maybe it was a trauma. Maybe it was a triumph. Maybe it was a brokenness in their family. Maybe it was a fear, as people have talked about here, a fear that led them to this hard sense of the way the world is, right? And that can open up a conversation about how you came to your worldview. And you can talk about your own experiences, your own triumphs, your own traumas, your own losses, your own pain, right? And I really do believe that this is what happens at Civic Saturday. This is, and this is why people who come to Civic Saturday are not just, the liberal choir. These are happening in rural small towns that are rather red, or they're happening in, purple cities like Oklahoma City. They're happening in places that are strongly faith-based, in places that are strongly irreligious, right? All kinds. But if you start with this kind of foundational commitment to rehumanizing the conversation, again, not to win the argument, but just to understand, I'm not saying that is therefore going to take you immediately to, okay, well, they're going to be on my side now. But it's going to be the necessary step of we're going to be able to see each other, and they're going to be able to hear me in a different way. And maybe this will only be the beginning of what will be a decade-long conversation in which gradually they will come to appreciate the ways in which, okay, it's not just about individual grit, it is about structural and historical, oppression and inequity, and in which you might also be changed as well. Because the other principle of this is you can't go into this hoping only that the other person will be transformed. The only way they might be transformed is if you yourself are willing to be changed. And so maybe you will begin to see and take a little bit, yeah, look, I get why personal responsibility matters. And even though I don't lead with that in the way I talk, I feel it. And I wouldn't even be in this room if it weren't for my beliefs and personal responsibility. So we can agree on that, right? But that sense of kind of both rehumanizing and, again, not so that you will either convert the other person or so that you will come to exact policy consensus. It's okay to disagree, but we can learn to argue better. And the last resource I'll point your folks to in this room is a project that we run with the Aspen Institute and Facing History on Ourselves with the support of Allstate. And it's called the Better Arguments Project, betterarguments.org. I'll put that in chat. And it teaches you all these methods of how to do just what you're talking about, Karen. The first link I'm putting in a chat right now is just citizenuniversity.us, and that is our organization. If you're interested in anything we've talked about here, come join us, come check us out. And if what you want to do is particularly drill down on this kind of notion of better arguments, then go to this website. I spelled it wrong, but go to betterarguments.org. And again, Karen, I just want to both thank you for having me today, but also commend you and the team and your organization for for practicing what I'm preaching in a way that's changing the state of Colorado and the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. On behalf of everyone that's in this Zoom room, thank you for sharing with us and for reminding us that power is innate, it's infinite, it's ever present, and then we could either activate it or let it lie dormant. And we still, that's one decision, and the next decision is if it's activated, are we going to hoard it or are we going to circulate it? And it's only through that circulation that we can get the exponential power, no pun intended, the exponential effect of our power. So thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I think we'll be back in May with another conversation that'll continue this conversation arc about power leading up to the symposium in July. Thank you again. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.